Well, hi there. My name is Debi Waldeck. I'm creator of the Saving Generation Next project. You guys, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease many years ago. And like so many people, I was afraid, and I asked why. Getting no answers, I followed the course of treatment, which was to be prescribed a medication. Unfortunately, they didn't know at that time that that drug could cause a problem in the heart of an unborn child. Shortly thereafter, I became pregnant. And through the course of my pregnancy, I was told to abort the baby. Now, this was really a life-changing moment because I decided to not listen to the establishment and to move forward. Now, our child was born with some complications, but it was the impetus of truly learning the language of the body. I needed to understand why the immune system becomes hyperactive, evidenced by asthmas and allergies and so on. And so that began this quest. And 7 years later, after close to 10,000 hours of research, I identified 3 pillars that are at the root of depression, ADHD, autoimmune disease, lupus, psoriasis. I mean, the list was endless. But it was something that I could do something about. And in the end, I became whole, as did our children, our child. And so I have created this Saving Generation Next project to truly teach preventative health education so that we can learn the language of the body, connect the dots, really understand way in advance the early red flags and warning signs of an impending diagnosis. And with this, you see, we can take charge of our health with knowledge, because knowledge is power. Monday evening, I'm presenting a presentation on why the increase in ADD, ADHD, particularly though, what do things like ADHD, dementia, depression, and even toenail fungus have in common. Because it's Memorial Day, I'll be repeating that webinar on June the 11th. Both of these take place at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and you can register at any time by going to DebiWaldeck.com. You want to make sure you spell that right, DebiWaldeck.com. And so what I'd like to do for you now is I'd like to give you an introduction of what's going to happen on Monday night. Now, you guys, I can't cover all of this in the complimentary webinar on Monday night, which will be about 45 to 50 minutes. I'm going to give you a touch of what I'll be talking about today. And so for that reason, if you go to my website, I've created a video vault where I take these presentations and I expand on them. I include clinical references, PDFs that you can download, and you can go through and view them over and over and over and again. So for instance, this discussion in my video vault will be closer to 2 hours than the 45 minutes, but it really will give you answers. So let's first talk about children. If you go to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website, that's cdc.gov, and search ADHD, you're going to find statistics and statements discerning the rates and increase of ADD, ADHD in the United States currently. But what I find fascinating are the statements made by the CDC that's explaining ADHD. And there's 3 points that I want to talk about today, or really 3 points I'd like to question. First, the CDC states that attention deficit disorder is one of the most common mental health disorders of childhood. And the symptoms of ADHD would be things like inattention, impulsive behavior, and hyperactivity, which begin in childhood and are often persisting into adulthood. That's from the CDC. But here's what I'd like to talk about. First of all, what is a child? What is childlike? What is childish? If you look it up, it's silly, it's innocent, frank, childish selfishness even, outbursts of temper. These are just a few. So then I looked at what's impulsive, tending to act without thought, automatic, careless, emotional, instinctive, and even intuitive. I don't know about you, but I don't know too many children who are predictable, thoughtful to consequences while young, and, who don't break glasses while they're washing the dishes, careless, and hyperactive. Okay, excessively active or excitable, high-strung, hyper, overactive, overzealous. Interesting, if you go to the online thesaurus or dictionary and look up hyperactive, the first thing you're going to get at the top is advertisements for ADHD medication. So we've equated active or hyperactive with ADHD. Now, for parents with very high-strung children who are difficult to control, my child was diagnosed with ADD. I was told he had ADD. All right. And I get it. I understand. And at times he was coming out of his skin, and I can understand how draining it is. But in my gut, I knew something else was going on. In fact, both of our children were very independent and in some ways difficult. But I saw that behavior was affected by what they ate or watched. For instance, I began to observe. I began to journal everything that goes in and everything goes out and behaviors in between, and made some really interesting observations that helped me in those first 7 years. First, I want to thank my son for allowing me to use his signature. But for instance, this little guy was told by his teachers and the preschool people and so on, he has ADD. And so I asked him, for instance, to write his name. And now I waited 15 minutes after feeding him peanut butter, and I asked him to write his name again. And he couldn't even spell it. Now, I can show you this because this gives you a visual of what it looked like when he was spaced out or hyper, so on and so forth. But it was never about peanut butter, but an internal imbalance in his intestinal ecology that caused him to respond differently to foods than another child. And this is why red food coloring or sugar doesn't make all children hyper, but some. But it isn't about ADD. The more imbalanced the intestinal area, the greater the reaction to the environment. The good news is, because I understood this, we corrected the imbalance, and our son graduated with highest honors and has just completed his 3rd year at the United States Military Academy. You see, he never had ADHD, and I never gave him the medication. The CDC, the second point I want to talk about, they say that the causes and risk factors for ADHD are unknown. Okay, unknown. But genetic factors play a role. That's from the CDC. But if you look closer at the CDC website, now mind you, after saying that ADHD is largely due to genetics, there's a graph showing rates of ADHD in various socioeconomic classes. So for instance, when you look, or here's one for instance, let's look at this real closely. Now, ADHD, if it's related to genes, okay? Well, in the green column, this person has a genetic risk, but did not smoke during pregnancy. The odds of their child having ADHD is very low. Now, if they smoke and have no genetic risk, the odds of them having a child with ADHD is greater than the one with the genetic risk. And then when you combine the genetic risk with the environmental factor, smoking in this situation, you can see that it's more than threefold the odds of having a child with ADHD. So the point is, it's never been about genetics. We've had the same genetics. It's the combination of lifestyle and genetics and our ignorance. Or how about geography? These are rates of diagnosis of ADHD from 1998 to 2009, according to the CDC in the South, Midwest, Northeast. And I don't know, I guess people in the West don't have ADHD genes. Is that what this means? When you look at this, I think that there's been an increase in ADHD diagnosis because of 2 government programs that were instigated in early 1990s. The Supplemental Security Income Program. They handed out cash to low-income parents whose children were diagnosed with ADHD. And I question if moms, ignorant of the harm, would ask their kids to act a little crazy or simply state that their child was impulsive, inattentive, and hyper. And I wonder, since the CDC in 2012 reported that the highest rate of parent-reported ADHD diagnosis were noted among children covered by Medicaid and multiracial children. Again, this is ignorance. Additionally, the Department of Education plays a role because we have schools that get hundreds of thousands of dollars in special education grant money every year for every child who's diagnosed with ADHD. Now think about this. The third point is the CDC states that diagnosis of ADHD involves several steps, including a medical exam, checklist for rating ADHD symptoms based on reports from the parents, teachers, and sometimes the child. But here's the real truth. We're being suckered by semantics. The Global Language Monitor estimates the number of words in the English language in 1990 was 500,000. Believe it or not, in 2000, we passed 1 million words with, believe it or not, the word Web 2.0. With the freedom to add any word we wish, whether it be Kleenex, fax, Google, sexting, or Octomon, why are we changing the meaning of an old word? OTC, what does that mean to you? Over the counter, all right? Or the acronym, over the counter, right? Well, that refers to a pharmaceutical drug that can be bought without a prescription. However, the origin of OTC referred to a drug from the pharmacist that was handed to you over the counter, not off the shelf. So originally it meant a prescription drug. We should call all prescription drugs OTCs, and anything we're buying off the shelf like Prilosec, ibuprofen, or Benadryl, OFS, for off the shelf. But you see, when we change the meaning of a word, we have a great deal of power. And that power is about changing your mind. Because now, when you buy an OTC item, we've subconsciously forgotten that it is a drug and was a drug and at a time needed a prescription. And now we're self-medicating. We're actually prescribing and medicating for ourselves as a society. Yet legislation is being pushed to limit the availability of vitamins and nutritionals in an effort to protect the consumer from self-medicating. This is crap. We are not being protected. We're being made sick and dumbed down. ADHD diagnosis according to poverty level. Less than 100% of poverty level, the really poor, we see the increases. 100 to 199% of poverty level, we see a dramatic increase. But people who are 200% over the poverty level, I guess they don't have ADHD genes? I mean, what's going on here? Are we being dumbed down? When you look at those government programs and then understand that 40 years prior to 1991, there was virtually no increase in ADHD diagnosis. But right in hand with the money being handed out to poor families and to schools, we then began to see a 700% increase. And this was only from 92 through like 97. It's very difficult to get the stats in this country today. But I had the great pleasure of traveling through Australia in 2004 to Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, Melbourne, and so on. And I wanted my statistics to be relevant to the Australians. So I pulled Australian numbers and was able to find better numbers. And here's what I found. And I'm not going to go through all the territories, but in 1992 to 93, for instance, look at Victoria. There was 1,590 prescriptions for dexamphetamine. In 1990, 35,000. This is a sin. We're telling our children and adolescents that in order to be normal, they've got to take medication without examining the long-term effects on brain and behavior. Now, scientists have different views on reasons behind the dramatic increase in ADHD, but come on. We're saying it's genetic on the one hand, but on the other hand, we had 150,000 in 1970 and 4.5 million today. You know what it is? We've changed the definition of child. How many will there be in 2020? That there's a foundation to the universe, and there is one also in our body. In fact, there's three pillars to health: intestinal ecology, inflammation, and antioxidants. And I can show you that 99% of the conditions that are out there the pillars have been disrupted. And I can show you on Monday night how intestinal ecology disruption leads to inflammation, and both of those lead to a depletion of our own antioxidants. These things are affected, of course, by diet and genetics, but more minorly than you would know if you understood how to build the foundation of the pillars. Think about it. Inflammation at its root has something called cytokines. I can show you how the intestinal area imbalance leads to the inflammation. And now look at this. A new variant of inflammatory bowel disease, another immunological-based disease, was recently suggested in children with ADHD. I can show you how the gut trains the immune system. Cytokines in Alzheimer's and dementia. Cytokines in depression. Yeast infections and IBS, yeast infections and toenail fungus. You guys, it's all the same. We have to build the pillars. If you found this intriguing, please join me Monday night, May the 28th at 5:30 p.m. Because it's Memorial Day, I'm doing something I've never done before. I'll repeat it on June the 11th. So if you can't make it, register for the one or the other and do me a favor. Let's save Generation Next together. Let's connect the dots and learn the language of the body and share this with your friends and family. Thanks so much. This is Debi Waldeck. We'll see you next time.